The relentless rain hammered against the windshield, each droplet exploding into blurred starbursts that rendered the Manhattan streets an abstract tableau of desperation. Elena's hands trembled on the steering wheel of her ancient Honda Civic, her gaze darting to the rearview mirror for the 100th time in 10 minutes. Derek's silver BMW persisted, a weaving menace 3 cars behind, its headlights piercing the storm like predatory eyes. At 23, she was fleeing for her life from a man she had once believed she loved. Come on, she whispered to her car, her foot pressing harder on the accelerator as another red light loomed. The engine wheezed in protest, a familiar lament from a year spent meticulously hoarding every penny for her physical therapy certification, earned through grueling double shifts at the rehabilitation clinic. Her entire existence had been a fragile construct of hope and sheer determination until Derek Morrison decided she was his property. The light flickered green, and she floored it, the tires slipping momentarily on the slick asphalt. Derek's car surged forward, narrowing the treacherous gap. Through his windshield, she could discern his silhouette, a phone pressed to his ear, undoubtedly orchestrating her entrapment. Her ribs still ached from their last encounter, 3 days prior, when she had attempted to sever ties once and for all. His grip had been bone-crushing, his fingers bruising her arms as he bellowed that no one left Derek Morrison, that she was his. And he would ensure she understood that, one way or another. She had sought refuge at her friend Sarah's apartment since then, but somehow, he had found her tonight. A relentless shadow trailing her through the rain-soaked streets, hunting her like prey. And he was something hungry and vicious. The speedometer needle crept towards 45 as she navigated the narrow canyons of the financial district, where towering glass monuments to capitalism stood sentinel, glittering like cold, indifferent tombstones. At this late hour, most buildings were dark save for scattered windows, beacons of late-night work or the passage of security guards. Derek's BMW gained another car length. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat. She didn't need to look to know it was him. His calls and texts had been relentless for the past 20 minutes, each message more chilling than the last. The most recent, glimpsed at a red light, had been terrifyingly succinct. "You can't run forever, Elena." But she could try. She yanked the steering wheel sharply left onto Madison Avenue, her tires screaming in protest as the Civic fishtailed before regaining traction. Derek's engine roared behind her, a primal sound of pursuit. The rain continued its assault, transforming the world outside into a watercolor nightmare where forms bled into one another. It was then she saw the intersection ahead, Madison crossing East 47th. The traffic light cycled through its colors. She had perhaps 30 seconds before it turned red again. If she could clear it, and Derek became ensnared, she might lose him in the labyrinth of side streets beyond. She pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Honda's engine let out a sound like a dying animal, but the needle edged towards 50. The intersection loomed larger. Cross-traffic was already slowing as their light shifted to yellow. Almost there. That's when she noticed the black SUV. It idled at the cross street, awaiting its turn. A massive Escalade, radiating an aura of untouchable importance, a vehicle that cost more than she would earn in 2 years. Even through the rain and encroaching darkness, its immaculate presence was undeniable. Its tinted windows reflecting the streetlights like black mirrors. The traffic light ahead of her flickered from yellow to red. She should have stopped. Any rational person would have. But Derek's headlights filled her rear view, and rationality had abandoned her the moment she realized he was following her. She had seconds to choose: stop and confront Derek, or run the red light and pray the cross-traffic delay would grant her the head start she desperately needed. She chose to run. Her Civic shot through the intersection just as the cross-traffic light turned green. She caught a fleeting glimpse of the Escalade beginning to move, its driver likely assuming the path was clear. Time slowed to a honey-thick crawl. She saw her car's trajectory intersect with the SUV's path. She saw the speedometer, hovering near 50. She saw the exact moment her ancient Honda collided with what had to be the most expensive vehicle she had ever been near. The impact flung her forward against her seatbelt, the airbag exploding in her face with a chemical punch. The world dissolved into a symphony of crushing metal, breaking glass, and the screaming protest of two engines that had abruptly ceased their intended functions. Then, silence, broken only by the steady patter of rain on twisted metal and the hiss of escaping steam. She sat stunned for a moment, the taste of blood in her mouth from where she'd bitten her tongue, her ears ringing from the concussive force. Her car had come to rest at an angle that effectively blocked most of the intersection. Its front end crumpled grotesquely against the Escalade's rear quarter panel. "Oh God," she whispered, the crushing reality of her actions washing over her like ice water. "Oh God. Oh God. Oh God." She had just T-boned someone's incredibly expensive SUV while running a red light. Even with her laughably inadequate insurance, this would financially annihilate her. And that was assuming the other driver wouldn't press charges for reckless driving. With shaking hands, she managed to unbuckle her seatbelt and shove her driver's door open. Rain immediately soaked through her sweater as she stumbled out to assess the damage. Her Civic's front end was obliterated, the hood buckled skyward, steam rising from the remains of the radiator. The Escalade had fared significantly better, bearing only a few paint scratches and a dent in the rear panel that somehow managed to look expensive. It was then she heard the car doors opening, 3 of them, to be precise. Not just the driver's, but passenger doors as well. She looked up through the sheeting rain to see figures emerging from the SUV, and her blood turned to slush in her veins. The first man was tall and lean, clad in a dark suit that appeared miraculously pressed despite the downpour. He moved with the fluid grace of someone intimately acquainted with violence, and even in the dim street lighting, the telltale bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket was visible. The second man was broader, built like a linebacker, with hands that seemed capable of crushing bones and a face that suggested he had done precisely that on multiple occasions. He positioned himself near the rear of the SUV, his eyes scanning the intersection with professional alertness. But it was the third man who stole her breath. He emerged from the driver's side with the unhurried confidence of one who owned every space he occupied. Tall and powerfully built, likely in his early 30s, with dark hair that maintained its perfect styling even in the relentless rain. His suit was undeniably expensive, tailored to accentuate broad shoulders and a lean waist. And he wore it with the casual elegance of a man born to wealth and absolute power. Yet it was his eyes that stopped her heart, dark brown, almost black in the street lighting. They fixed on her with an intensity that made every instinct she possessed scream danger. This was not merely someone wealthy enough to afford a luxury SUV. This was someone accustomed to having problems solved quickly and quietly, by whatever means necessary. He walked towards her with measured steps, the rain beating on his suit seemingly without touching him. When he spoke, his voice carried an accent she couldn't quite place, something European, perhaps Italian, and an authority that left no doubt he was accustomed to instant obedience. "You just caused $50,000 in damage to my vehicle," he said, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. Elena swallowed hard, tasting blood and rain. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. Now you owe me your life." The word struck her like another collision, final and absolute. Behind him, his 2 companions had taken positions that effectively blocked any potential escape routes. Though she doubted her legs would have carried her far anyway. It was then that Derek's BMW screeched to a halt behind her wrecked Civic. The sleek black SUV that now carried her through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan felt more like a hearse than a rescue vehicle. Elena sat rigidly in the back seat, acutely aware of the 2 silent men flanking her, their expensive suits and concealed weapons underscoring that this was no charitable ride. The man who had emerged from the Escalade, the one whose penetrating brown eyes still haunted her thoughts, sat across from her with the casual confidence of someone who held dominion over any space he entered. Dante Moretti, that's what the lean man with the shoulder holster had called him, bundling her into this opulent cage after Derek's mysterious disappearance into the night. Just Dante, spoken with a reverence usually reserved for royalty or religious figures. "Where are you taking me?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine and the steady drumming of rain against bulletproof glass. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied, his accented voice carrying undertones she couldn't quite identify. Italian, definitely, but refined by years of American education and business dealings. "Your friend Derek won't be bothering you anymore." The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. Derek's silver BMW had simply vanished from the intersection along with its driver, as if neither had ever existed. When she had dared to inquire about his fate, Dante had merely offered a smile, an expression utterly devoid of warmth. "What did you do to him?" "I convinced him to pursue other interests," Dante said, adjusting the cuffs of his pristine white shirt. Even after standing in the rain and dealing with a car accident, he looked as if he had just stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine. "Derek Morrison has been operating under the mistaken impression that he could conduct business in my territory without consequences. Tonight provided an excellent opportunity to correct that misunderstanding." Elena stared at him, attempting to process the casual way he discussed what sounded suspiciously like a threat, or worse. "Your territory?" "Manhattan below 59th Street. The docks in Brooklyn. Several establishments in Queens." Dante's dark eyes met hers with unnerving intensity. "You've been living and working in areas under my family's protection for over a year."
Elena Harper.
Her blood turned to slush. He knew her name. Her full name. "How do you?" 23 years old, graduated from NYU with a degree in physical therapy last spring, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Currently working at Riverside Rehabilitation Center on East 34th Street while completing your certification requirements. Lives alone in a studio apartment on 47th Street. Pays rent 3 days late every month, but always pays in full." Each detail struck her like a separate blow. "You've been watching me?" "I've been watching Derek Morrison," Dante corrected, pulling a tablet from a compartment she hadn't noticed. "Derek Morrison, who owes money to people connected to my organization. Derek Morrison, who has been using you as collateral for debts he can't pay." The words didn't make sense at first, pinballing through her brain. Collateral. 3 weeks ago, Derek borrowed $50,000 from an associate of mine to cover gambling debts he owed to other, less patient creditors. Dante explained, swiping across the tablet screen to reveal what appeared to be financial records. When he defaulted on the payment schedule, he offered alternative compensation.
"You."
She felt like she was falling through space, the world tilting sideways around her. "That's impossible. We broke up. I told him I never wanted to see him again." "Yes, I'm aware of your attempts to end the relationship." Dante's voice carried a note of something that might have been sympathy. "Derek had no intention of honoring your wishes. He planned to deliver you to my associate tonight, claiming you had agreed to work off his debt through specialized services." The implications crashed over her like ice water. Derek hadn't been chasing her out of jealousy or possessive anger. He'd been hunting her like cargo, planning to hand her over to criminals who would use her to pay his debts. "I had no idea," she whispered, her hands shaking in her lap. "I believe you." Dante reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. Elena Harper, daughter of Michael and Sarah Harper, both deceased. No siblings, no close family. Worked her way through college while caring for her grandmother until the woman's death 2 years ago. Clean record, no criminal associations, no debts beyond standard student loans. He knew everything about her, more than Derek had ever bothered to learn during their 6-month relationship. The SUV turned onto a tree-lined avenue in what she recognized as Long Island's most exclusive area. Mansion after mansion rolled past the windows, each one representing more wealth than she'd see in a lifetime of physical therapy work. "Where are we going?" she asked again. "My home." Dante closed the folder with a decisive snap. "Derek Morrison's arrangement with my associate has been terminated. But that leaves us with a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that gets you killed if we handle it incorrectly." The SUV slowed as they approached a set of imposing iron gates set into a stone wall that seemed to stretch for blocks. Victor Klov doesn't believe in coincidences, Elena. When he discovers that Derek's collateral happened to crash into my vehicle on the same night Derek disappeared, he's going to assume you're working for me. Victor Klov. The name meant nothing to her, but Dante pronounced it like a curse word. Who is Victor Klov? The head of the Russian organization that's been trying to expand into my territory for the past 2 years. The gate swung open silently, revealing a driveway that curved through manicured gardens towards a mansion that belonged in architectural magazines. He's also the man Derek owed money to before he came to my associate for help. Elena watched the enormous house grow larger as they approached, her brain struggling to keep up with the layers of criminal politics she'd apparently stumbled into. So, Derek owed money to this Klov person, borrowed from your people to pay him back, and was planning to give me to your associate when he couldn't repay the loan? Precisely. Dante seemed pleased that she was following the logic. Victor Klov is not known for his forgiving nature. When he discovers that Derek has vanished and you've survived, he's going to want answers. And Victor's interrogation methods are considerably less gentle than mine. The SUV came to a stop in front of the mansion's main entrance, where more men in dark suits waited. Through the rain, she could discern the outline of security cameras, motion sensors, and what looked suspiciously like armed guards positioned strategically around the property. "This is kidnapping," she said, though the words sounded hollow even to her. "This is protection," Dante replied, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "You're not safe out there anymore, Elena. Derek made sure of that when he put your name on documents as his collateral." The door beside her opened, revealing the lean man with a shoulder holster. Marco. Dante had called him during the brief, tense conversation they'd had while transferring her from her wrecked Honda to this SUV. "Welcome to the Moretti estate, Miss Harper," Marco said, his voice professionally courteous, but carrying an undertone that suggested disagreement wasn't an option. Elena looked back at Dante, who was already stepping out of the vehicle with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to having his every need anticipated. "How long?" "That depends on several factors," he replied, straightening his suit jacket. "How quickly we can locate Derek Morrison's current whereabouts. How much information Victor Klov already has about tonight's events. How effectively we can convince him that you pose no threat to his operations. And if you can't convince him?" Dante's smile returned, cold and sharp as winter steel. "Then we'll have to explore other options." As she followed him up the stone steps towards the mansion's entrance, rainwater streaming from her hair and her clothes still damp from the accident, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. She looked exactly like what she was, a 23-year-old physical therapy student who had stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. But Dante Moretti looked like he was coming home. The foyer that greeted them was larger than her entire apartment, with marble floors that reflected the light from a crystal chandelier and artwork that likely cost more than she'd make in 5 years. Everything spoke of old money, established power, and the kind of security that came from being untouchable. "Your rooms are on the 2nd floor," Dante said, handing his wet suit jacket to a woman who appeared from nowhere to take it. "Marco will show you up and explain the house rules. We'll discuss your situation in more detail tomorrow after you've had time to process tonight's events." "House rules?" "Nothing unreasonable," Marco assured her, gesturing towards a sweeping staircase. "Mostly for your own protection. The grounds are secure, but we ask that guests don't wander unescorted after dark. The staff is discreet and trustworthy, but we prefer that certain topics not be discussed with them." Elena followed him up the stairs, acutely aware of how out of place she looked in this palace of marble and mahogany. Her sneakers squeaked slightly against the polished steps, and she was certain she was leaving damp footprints on priceless carpets. "Miss Harper." Dante's voice stopped her at the top of the stairs. She turned to find him looking up at her with those intense brown eyes, his expression unreadable. "You're not a prisoner here. You're a guest under my protection, but understand that protection comes with certain obligations." "What kind of obligations?" "Complete honesty about your relationship with Derek Morrison. Full cooperation with our security measures. And absolute discretion about what you see and hear while you're here." His voice carried the weight of law, as if these weren't requests, but commandments. Can I count on your compliance? She thought about Derek's plan to sell her to criminals, about Victor Klov and his reportedly harsh interrogation methods, about the wreckage of her Honda Civic sitting in that intersection along with her old life. Yes, she said quietly. You can count on it. Excellent. Dante's smile this time held a trace of genuine warmth. Welcome to your new life, Elena Harper. 3 days at the Moretti mansion had taught Elena that luxury could feel surprisingly like a velvet-lined prison. She woke each morning in a bedroom larger than most people's entire apartments, surrounded by furnishings that belonged in museums. Served meals by silent staff who treated her with polite deference while never quite meeting her eyes. This is ridiculous, she muttered to her reflection in the bathroom mirror, framed in what appeared to be genuine gold leaf. Her red hair seemed stark against the imported Italian marble and fixtures that likely cost more than her yearly salary. She was not his possession, yet the accumulating evidence suggested otherwise. Designer clothes had materialized in the walk-in closet, all in her exact size, all in styles she would have chosen if given unlimited funds. The bathroom was stocked with luxury cosmetics and skincare products from brands she had only ever seen in magazines. Even her meals were perfectly calibrated to her preferences, as if someone had studied her dietary habits with scientific precision, which she was beginning to suspect they had. A soft knock at her suite door interrupted her brooding. Marco's voice followed immediately. Miss Harper, Mr. Moretti requests your presence in the dining room. She had quickly learned that requests from Dante Moretti were not, in fact, requests at all. I'll be down in a minute, she called back. Smoothing the wrinkles from the silk blouse she'd reluctantly chosen from the mysteriously well-stocked closet. Everything fit perfectly, of course. Even the undergarments were her exact size, a level of attention to detail that should have been flattering, but instead felt deeply invasive. The dining room could have hosted a small wedding, with its crystal chandelier and a table stretching at least 20 feet. Yet only 2 places were set this morning. At one end, where morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the meticulously maintained gardens, Dante sat reading what appeared to be financial reports, his dark hair impeccably styled despite the early hour. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car before she destroyed it in the accident that had brought them together. When he looked up at her approach, those intense brown eyes assessed her with the same thoroughness he might apply to a business acquisition. Good morning, Elena. I trust you slept well. As well as anyone can when they're being held against their will, she replied, taking the seat across from him. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she was tired of pretending this arrangement was anything other than what it was. Against your will? Dante set down his papers with deliberate care, giving her his full attention. You're free to leave whenever you choose. The front door isn't locked, and you can walk straight into Victor Klov's arms. You've made it very clear that's not actually an option. Victor Klov is the reality of your situation, not something I created. Dante poured coffee from an antique silver service into a cup that likely cost more than her monthly rent. Though I understand your frustration, this isn't the life you planned for yourself. Elena accepted the coffee, inhaling the rich aroma that spoke of exotic beans and professional preparation. Even imprisoned, she was being treated better than she had ever treated herself. What is this exactly? This arrangement? Am I a guest, a prisoner, or something else entirely? You're under my protection, Dante replied, the same phrase he'd used 3 days ago. Which means you're my responsibility until we resolve the threat against you. I never asked for your protection. No, but you needed it. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the polished mahogany table. Derek Morrison's body was found yesterday morning in the Hudson River. 3 bullet wounds. Signs of torture before death. Victor Klov's signature work. Her hand froze halfway to the envelope, coffee cup suspended in midair. Derek was dead. Actually dead, not just disappeared. The man who'd terrorized her, who'd planned to sell her like property, was now fish food in New York's most polluted waterway. How do you? Because I have sources throughout the city's criminal networks, Dante interrupted gently. Derek Morrison attempted to negotiate directly with Victor Klav yesterday morning. He offered to provide information about my operations in exchange for forgiveness of his debts. Elena forced herself to pick up the envelope, though her hand shook slightly. Inside were photographs, crime scene shots that made her stomach lurch. Derek's body, bloated and pale, pulled from the water. Police reports. Medical examiner findings. Victor didn't believe Derek had access to useful intelligence, Dante continued, his voice matter-of-fact, despite the graphic evidence spread between them. But he was very interested to learn about the woman Derek had offered as collateral. The woman who crashed into my vehicle on the same night Derek disappeared. He thinks I'm working for you. He thinks you're either working for me, or you possess information that could be valuable to him. Either way, he wants very much to have a conversation with you. Dante's smile held no warmth. Victor Klav's conversations tend to be brief, but extremely unpleasant. Elena stared at the crime scene photographs, trying to reconcile the violent corpse with the man who'd once brought her flowers and promised to change his controlling behavior. Derek had been terrible, abusive, possessive. But seeing him reduced to bloated meat and morgue photos made her feel sick. "I need some air," she said, pushing back from the table. "Of course. The gardens are lovely this time of day." Dante gestured towards the French doors that led to the terrace. "Marco will accompany you, naturally." Naturally? She stood, leaving the photographs scattered on the table like evidence of everything wrong with the world she'd stumbled into. "Because you're under my protection, Elena." Dante's voice stopped her at the door. When she turned, his expression held something that might have been genuine concern. "I know this isn't the life you wanted, but it's the life that will keep you breathing." The gardens were even more impressive in daylight, with carefully planned landscapes that created intimate spaces within the larger grounds. Marco followed at a discreet distance as she walked gravel paths between flower beds that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Everything was perfect, controlled, beautiful, and completely artificial. She found herself at a small pond where ornamental fish swam in lazy circles, trapped in their perfect environment, just as she was trapped in hers. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Enjoying the view?" Dante's voice came from behind her, closer than she'd expected. She turned to find him approaching alone, having apparently dismissed Marco. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolling up his shirt sleeves in a gesture that should have made him look more casual, but somehow only emphasized the power in his forearms and the expensive watch that caught the morning sunlight. "It's very controlled," she said. "Everything in its proper place, serving its intended purpose." "You think that's what this is? Control for its own sake? Isn't it?" She faced him directly, tired of the careful politeness that had defined their interactions. "You've researched every detail of my life, dressed me like a doll, fed me like a pet, and surrounded me with enough luxury to make me grateful for my captivity. It's very sophisticated, but it's still control." Something flickered in Dante's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Most people in your situation would be either terrified into compliance or trying to seduce me for advantage." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the faint scar along his jawline. "You're doing neither. Maybe I'm just not most people." "No," he agreed softly. "You're definitely not." The moment stretched between them, charged with an attraction she didn't want to acknowledge. Dante Moretti was everything she should fear. Powerful, dangerous, controlling. But standing here in his perfect garden, she couldn't ignore the way her pulse quickened when he looked at her like she was something rare and valuable. "Tell me something," she said, breaking the tension before she did something stupid. "The night you found me, when I crashed into your car, you were leaving a meeting, weren't you? Something to do with Victor Klav." Dante's expression shuddered slightly. "Yes." "What kind of meeting requires bulletproof vehicles and armed escorts?" "The kind where people discuss territory, business arrangements, and occasionally who lives or dies." His honesty was brutal and refreshing after 3 days of careful euphemisms. "I was attempting to negotiate a peaceful resolution to Victor's expansion into my areas of influence." "And how did that go?" "Poorly." Victor Clav isn't interested in peaceful resolutions. Dante turned away from her, looking out over his controlled paradise. He believes that power should be taken, not negotiated for. Is that what this is about? Power? It's about protecting what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice made her shiver despite the warm morning air. My family, my people, my territory. Victor Clav wants to tear down everything my father and grandfather built, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process. Your father and grandfather? The Moretti family has controlled certain aspects of New York's economy for 3 generations, Dante said, as casually as he might discuss the weather. Shipping, construction, waste management, import, export, legitimate businesses with unofficial aspects. And Victor wants to take that away from you. Victor wants me dead, and my organization absorbed into his. Dante turned back to face her, his expression deadly serious. The night you crashed into my car, I was returning from our final attempt at negotiation. He'd made it clear that war was inevitable. The weight of that statement settled over her like a lead blanket. She wasn't just caught between 2 men, she was caught between 2 armies preparing for battle. Where does that leave me? Safer here than anywhere else in the city, Dante replied. Until we can eliminate the threat Victor poses. Eliminate the threat, she repeated. You mean kill him? I mean protect what matters to me. Dante's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And you matter to me, Elena, more than you should, considering how we met. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Dante Moretti was offering her something. Protection, luxury, possibly even affection. But the price was her freedom, her old life, any chance of being anything other than a kept woman in a criminal's paradise. I need to think, she said finally. Of course. Dante stepped back, giving her space, but not breaking eye contact. Take all the time you need. But remember, out there, you're Elena Harper, physical therapy student with no protection and no resources. Here, you're under the protection of the Moretti family. That means something in this city. As he walked away, leaving her alone with the ornamental fish and her complicated thoughts, she realized he was right about one thing. She wasn't most people. Most people would have chosen safety over uncertainty, luxury over freedom. But she was beginning to understand that most people had never felt the dangerous pull of Dante Moretti's attention, or the terrifying possibility that being his might be exactly what she'd been searching for without even knowing it. The attack came at 3:17 a.m., announced by the shattering of glass and the sharp crack of automatic weapons fire echoing through the mansion's marble corridors. Elena bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as adrenaline flooded her system. The security lights outside her window had activated, bathing the grounds in a harsh, white glare that revealed dark figures moving with military precision between the carefully manicured hedges. This was no robbery. This was war. Her bedroom door burst open before she could fully process what was happening. Marco appeared in tactical gear, his face grim as he swept the room with practiced efficiency. Miss Harper, we need to move now. What's happening? Clav's people found us. Marco was already at the closet, pulling out clothes and throwing them at her.
Get dressed.
We have maybe 3 minutes before they breach the main house. Elena scrambled into jeans and a sweater, her fingers shaking as gunfire continued to erupt from multiple directions. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. The perfectly ordered world of the Moretti estate had transformed into a battlefield. Where's Dante? Coordinating the defense. Marco checked his weapon with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. He wanted you moved to the panic room immediately. The panic room turned out to be a reinforced bunker hidden behind a bookshelf in Dante's study. It was equipped with communication equipment, medical supplies, and enough food and water to survive a siege. Banks of monitors showed every angle of the estate, revealing the terrifying scope of the assault. At least 20 armed figures had breached the perimeter, moving with the coordination of professional soldiers. How did they find us? She asked, watching the screens in horrified fascination as Dante's security forces engaged the attackers in running battles across the grounds. Someone talked. Marco replied grimly, speaking rapidly into his headset in Italian before switching to English. Or they followed a signal. Clav has resources we underestimated. On one monitor, she saw Dante himself leading a team of his men through the gardens, moving with the fluid grace of someone who'd been trained in combat. He wore tactical gear as if born to it, directing his forces with hand signals while laying down covering fire with an assault rifle. Watching him transform from sophisticated businessman into lethal warrior was both terrifying and mesmerizing. He's good at this, she found herself saying. Best I've ever seen, Marco agreed, monitoring multiple radio frequencies. Dante didn't just inherit his position. He earned it in situations exactly like this. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the persistent glow of the security monitors. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but the brief blackout felt like an omen. They're trying to cut power to the main systems, Marco explained, his fingers flying over the communication console. If they take out the generators, we lose surveillance and defensive coordination. On screen, Elena watched Dante's team fighting their way toward the backup power facility. But Clav's people had anticipated this move. The basement corridors swarmed with armed figures, turning the mansion's lower levels into a maze of deadly hide-and-seek. Marco, she said quietly, unable to tear her eyes from the screens. The night Derek died, you said Clav tortured him for information. What if Derek told him more than you realized? Marco's expression darkened as he considered this possibility. What do you mean? Derek knew I worked at the rehabilitation center. He knew my schedule, my routines, probably even my emergency contacts. She watched Dante disappear from one monitor only to reappear on another, still fighting his way through the mansion's defenses. What if he told Clav about my work? About the techniques I know? What kind of techniques? Physical therapy isn't just about helping people recover, she said, pieces clicking together in her mind. It's about understanding how bodies work, how they break, how to manipulate pain and healing. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could be very useful for interrogation. Marco went very still. You think Clav wants you alive for more than just information about Dante's operations? I think Derek sold me twice, she realized with growing horror. Once as collateral for his debts, and again as a potential asset when Clav captured him. The implications were staggering. Victor Clav wasn't just trying to eliminate a witness or capture a pawn in his war with Dante. He wanted someone with medical knowledge who could be useful for his own operations. Someone who understood human anatomy well enough to inflict precise damage or extract information efficiently. A new wave of explosions shook the mansion, closer this time. On the monitors, she could see that several of Clav's men had reached the main floor, moving systematically through rooms while Dante's forces fell back toward more defensible positions. Miss Harper, Marco said, his voice urgent as he received updates through his earpiece. We may need to evacuate to the secondary facility. What about Dante? He's ordered the fallback protocol. If we can't hold the main house, everyone retreats to the warehouse district where we have better tactical advantages. Elena watched the screens as the battle raged through the mansion she'd called home for the past week, the library where Dante and she had shared coffee, the gardens where they'd walked and talked, the dining room where he'd shown her photographs of Derek's corpse. All of it was being torn apart by men with automatic weapons and military training. There, she said, pointing to one monitor that showed Dante pinned down behind an overturned couch in what looked like the main foyer. He's trapped. 3 of Clav's men had him in a crossfire, using the cover of the marble pillars to advance on his position. I could see the calculation in their movements. They weren't trying to kill him quickly. They wanted to capture him alive, probably for the same reasons they wanted me. Marco, we have to help him. Miss Harper, my orders are to keep you safe. Dante would rather die than have you put in danger trying to save him. But what if there's another way? She studied the monitors, her physical therapy training kicking in as she analyzed the tactical situation like a complex rehabilitation case. I know this house better than Clav's people do. And I know things about combat injuries that could be useful. What are you thinking? The service corridors, she said, tracing routes on the monitor screens. The ones the staff used to move around without disturbing guests. They connect to every major room, including the foyer where Dante's pinned down. Marco shook his head. Too dangerous. More dangerous than letting Victor Clav capture the head of the Moretti family? She met his eyes directly. You said Dante earned his position. Let me earn mine. For a long moment, Marco wrestled with conflicting loyalties, his duty to protect her against his need to save his boss. Finally, he reached for a weapons case she hadn't noticed before. If we're doing this, he said grimly, you follow my lead exactly.
No heroics, no improvisation.
Understood. Understood. As Marco armed her with a compact pistol and explained the basics of point-and-shoot combat, Elena realized she was crossing a line she could never uncross. Elena Harper, physical therapy student, would never have considered charging into a gunfight to save a man she barely knew. But Elena Harper was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, more decisive, more willing to fight for what mattered to her. And Dante Moretti, dangerous, powerful, protective Dante, had somehow become what mattered most. The service corridors were narrow and dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in hellish red shadows. Marco moved ahead of her with practiced stealth, communicating through hand signals as they navigated the maze of passages that honeycombed the mansion. They could hear the gunfire above them, muffled by marble and hardwood, but still close enough to make her pulse race. Twice they had to freeze as footsteps passed overhead, Klav's men searching rooms and calling to each other in what sounded like Russian. There, Marco whispered as they reached a junction that connected to the main foyer. Through a service grate, they could see Dante's position. He was bleeding from a wound on his left arm, using his good hand to return fire while calculating options that were rapidly running out. When I give the signal, Marco breathed in her ear, you provide covering fire toward the pillars on the right. Don't try to hit anything. Just make noise and keep their heads down. I'll circle around and take them from behind. Elena nodded, gripping the pistol with hands that were steadier than she'd expected. The weight of the weapon felt foreign, but not uncomfortable, like a tool she'd always been meant to hold. Now, Marco whispered. Elena kicked out the service grate and opened fire toward the marble pillars, the pistol bucking in her hands as she squeezed the trigger repeatedly. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and she could see chips of marble flying as her shots went wide of their targets. But it worked. Klav's men dove for cover, their attention divided between Dante's position and this new threat from an unexpected angle. In that moment of confusion, Marco appeared behind them like a ghost, his weapons speaking with deadly precision. When the shooting stopped, 3 bodies lay motionless on the marble floor. And Dante was staring at her with an expression of amazement and something that might have been pride. Elena, he said, rising from his position behind the couch. What the hell are you doing here? Saving your life, she replied, surprised by how calm her voice sounded despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Dante crossed the foyer in quick strides, pulling her against his chest with his good arm while Marco secured the area. She could feel his heart racing against hers, smell the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne, feel the warmth of his breath against her hair. You could have been killed, he said roughly. So could you.
Anna.
The way he said her name carried weight, promise, claim. When he pulled back to look at her, his brown eyes held an intensity that made everything else, the gunfire, the danger, the bodies on the floor, fade into background noise. You're in danger because of me, he said softly. I know this isn't going to get easier. Clav won't stop until one of us is dead. She thought about Derek's corpse in the Hudson River, about the men who had just tried to capture them both, about the choice she was making by standing here in Dante's arms instead of demanding to be taken somewhere safe. Then don't leave me out of it, she said, meeting his gaze directly. If I'm going to be in danger anyway, let me be in it with you. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a decision made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Then his mouth was on hers, claiming her with a kiss that tasted of gunpowder and desperation and promises neither of them was ready to speak aloud. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the mansion had fallen silent around them. The battle for the Moretti estate was over, but the war with Victor Clav had only just begun, and Elena was no longer just collateral damage in that war. She was a willing participant, armed and dangerous, and completely, irrevocably committed to the man who held her like she was worth fighting the entire world to protect. The discovery came 3 days after the attack, hidden in Marco's personal effects like a bomb, waiting to detonate what remained of her trust. She'd been looking for first aid supplies in his room. He'd been unconscious since taking a bullet during the siege, when she found the encrypted phone, tucked inside a hollowed-out book on his nightstand. The messages were in Russian, but the contact name was clear enough. V. Clav. Her hands shook as she scrolled through months of communications, each exchange selling pieces of their lives to the enemy. Meeting schedules, security protocols, her daily routines, even photographs of her walking through the mansion's gardens, taken from angles that could only have been shot by someone with intimate access to the property. Marco, Dante's most trusted lieutenant. The man who'd stood beside her during the firefight, who'd trained her to use a weapon, who'd risked his life protecting what they both claimed to love. He'd been betraying them from the beginning.
Elena.
Dante's voice from the doorway made her jump, nearly dropping the phone. He stood in the entrance to Marco's room, his left arm still in a sling from the gunshot wound he'd sustained during the attack. The past 3 days had aged him, etching new lines around his eyes and a hardness in his jaw that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Dante stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with his good hand. "What did you find?" She held up the phone, watching his expression shift from curiosity to dangerous stillness as he processed what she was showing him. Marco's been feeding information to Claw for months, maybe longer. Dante crossed the room in 2 strides, taking the phone from her hands with surgical precision. His eyes scanned the messages, his face becoming a mask of cold fury as he read betrayals documented in black and white. "Son of a bitch," he said quietly, but the words carried the weight of an earthquake. "There's more," she said, dreading what came next, but knowing he had to hear it. "Dante, the night I crashed into your car, Marco knew I was going to be there." "What are you talking about?" She pointed to a message thread dated a week before the accident. "Look at the timestamps." Marco told Clav about Derek's debt, about his plan to use me as collateral. But there's something else. A message about routing your return from the meeting with Clav that night. "Marco made sure you'd be on Madison Avenue at exactly the right time." Dante went very still, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. "You're saying the accident wasn't random?" "I'm saying Marco orchestrated everything. Derek chasing me running that red light, even the exact intersection where we collided." The words tasted bitter as she spoke them.
"He wanted you to find me, Dante."
"He wanted you to bring me here." "Why would he?" Dante stopped, the implications crashing over him like ice water. "Because Clav knew about your medical background, your knowledge of anatomy, pain management, interrogation techniques. And because he knew you'd protect me," she added quietly. "Marco's been playing a long game, using me as bait to make you vulnerable." Dante set the phone down with careful control, but she could see the rage building in his dark eyes like storm clouds gathering. 20 feet away, Marco lay unconscious in the mansion's medical facility, hooked to machines that kept him alive while his body fought off infection from the gunshot wound that might have been meant to maintain his cover. "How long have you known?" Dante asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I found the phone an hour ago. I've been trying to work out how deep the betrayal goes." She pulled out printed copies she'd made of the most damaging messages. "It goes back at least 8 months, maybe longer. He's given Clav everything. Security protocols, financial information, personnel files, even details about your childhood, your family." Dante's jaw tightened as he scanned the evidence. "My parents, my sister, the anniversary of their deaths, the location where they're buried, even the specific way they were killed." She watched his hands clench into fists. Clav has been preparing for psychological warfare, not just physical. And you? Dante's eyes met hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. What did Marco tell him about you? She hesitated, then handed him another set of messages. Everything. My background, my training, my feelings for you. He's been documenting my integration into your life like a case study. Dante read in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Marco had cataloged every conversation, every moment of growing intimacy, every sign that Elena Harper was becoming more than just a protected asset to the head of the Moretti family. He turned our relationship into intelligence, Dante said finally. Worse than that, she replied, showing him the final set of messages. Look at the dates on these last exchanges. Marco is planning to deliver me to Clove during the next arranged meeting. When? Tomorrow night. There's a warehouse in Brooklyn where you're supposed to meet with Clove's representatives to discuss territorial agreements. Marco was going to drug me and present me as a peace offering. Dante went silent for a long moment, processing betrayals that cut deeper than bullets. His most trusted ally had been systematically dismantling everything he'd built, using the woman he cared about as the ultimate weapon against him. I should have seen it, he said finally. Marco's been with me for 5 years. He's saved my life twice, built half our security protocols, trained our people. That's what made him so valuable to Clove, she pointed out, and so dangerous to us. Dante looked toward the medical facility where Marco still fought for his life, machines beeping steadily in the distance. Part of me wants to walk in there and put a bullet in his head while he sleeps. But you won't. No, Dante agreed, because I need him alive long enough to find out what other surprises he's planted in our organization. And because... He paused, searching for words. Because you've taught me that not every problem should be solved with violence. The admission surprised them both. 3 weeks ago, Dante Moretti would have executed a traitor without hesitation. Now, he was considering alternatives, looking for solutions that didn't involve more blood on his hands. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking Marco gave us an opportunity along with his betrayal. Dante's expression shifted from fury to calculation, the strategic mind that had built an empire reasserting itself. Clove expects to receive you tomorrow night. What if we give him what he wants, but not the way he expects? You want to use me as bait? I want to use Marco's betrayal against Clove, Dante corrected. But only if you're willing. This would be dangerous, Elena. More dangerous than anything we've done so far. She thought about the encrypted phone, about months of documented intimacies sold to their enemy, about the man unconscious in the medical facility who'd smiled at her while planning her abduction. The woman who'd crashed into Dante's car 3 weeks ago would have been horrified by what she was considering. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more decisive, and absolutely furious at being betrayed by someone she'd begun to trust. What do you need me to do? Dante's smile was sharp as winter steel. Help me turn Marco's trap into Clove's funeral. As they began planning their counterattack, Elena realized she'd crossed another line in her transformation from innocent bystander to active participant in Dante's war. Marco's betrayal hadn't just exposed their vulnerabilities, it had stripped away the last of her illusions about the life she'd chosen. She wasn't just under Dante Moretti's protection anymore. She was his partner in everything, including revenge against the people who'd tried to use their love as a weapon against them both. Tomorrow night, Victor Clove would learn that some traps work both ways, and that the woman he tried so hard to capture was far more dangerous than he could possibly imagine. The warehouse in Brooklyn stood like a monument to forgotten industry, its broken windows reflecting the harbor lights in jagged fragments. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Dante's Maserati, watching the rain streak down the windshield while her heart hammered against her ribs. In 12 hours, this place would host a meeting that would either end the war with Victor Clove or get them both killed. You don't have to do this, Dante said for the 5th time since they'd left the mansion. His hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, and she could see the conflict warring in his brown eyes. We can find another way. There is no other way, she replied, adjusting the concealed microphone taped against her collarbone. Marco's betrayal gave us one chance to turn this around. If we don't take it, Claude will keep coming until one of us is dead. Dante parked in the shadow of a shipping container, away from the security cameras that would record tomorrow's meeting. Through the rain, she could see other vehicles positioned around the warehouse. Dante's men taking positions for what they all hoped would be Victor Claude's final mistake. "The moment you signal distress, we abort," Dante said, turning to face her in the dim interior. "I don't care if Claude has a gun to your head or promises to end the war. You signal and I come in shooting. And if everything goes according to plan, then tomorrow night, Victor Claude learns that the Moretti family doesn't negotiate with people who threaten what's ours." Dante's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd built an empire on the foundation of keeping his word. "But Elena, if something goes wrong..." She silenced him by pressing her lips to his, tasting rain and determination and the fear he was trying so hard to hide. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she could see her own resolve reflected in his eyes. "Nothing's going wrong," she said. "Marco gave us everything we need to know about Claude's operation, his security protocols, his personnel, even his psychological profile. We're not walking into a trap. We're building one." Dante nodded, but she could see the tension in his jaw. The way his fingers drummed against the steering wheel in patterns that spoke of nervous energy barely contained. "Tell me again what happens if he suspects you're working with me." "He won't," she said with more confidence than she felt. According to Marco's files, Claude expects his prisoners to show fear, defiance, or attempts at seduction. "I'm going to give him something else entirely, which is useful information he can verify, delivered by someone too terrified to lie." She adjusted the hidden recording device one more time. "Claude thinks he's getting a frightened physical therapy student who is in the wrong place at the wrong time. By the time he realizes what I actually am, it'll be too late." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marco's encrypted phone contained detailed intelligence about Claude's operation, locations, personnel, financial structures, everything they needed to dismantle his organization. But that intelligence was useless unless they could get close enough to verify it and identify targets for elimination. Her role was to play the terrified victim while secretly documenting everything she saw and heard. The recording equipment would capture conversations, locations, and personnel details that Dante's forces could use to coordinate simultaneous strikes against Claude's entire network. "And your brother?" Dante asked quietly. The question hit like ice water. 3 hours ago, they'd received confirmation that James Harper, the brother she'd mourned for 5 years, was not only alive but serving as one of Claude's most trusted lieutenants. The revelation had nearly broken something fundamental inside her, but it also provided the final piece of their plan. "James is the reason this will work," she said, though the words tasted bitter. "Claude will want to use our reunion as psychological leverage. He'll bring James to the meeting to demonstrate his power over me, and when you see him, I'll do what needs to be done." She met Dante's gaze directly. "James made his choice when he faked his death and joined Claude. Now I'm making mine." The truth was more complicated than she wanted to admit. Part of her still remembered the brother who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd protected her from bullies, who'd promised to always be there when their parents died. But that James Harper had died in the car accident 5 years ago. The man working for Victor Claude was someone else entirely. Someone who'd used her grief as cover for his new criminal career. "I need you to promise me something," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "What?" "Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow night, you'll remember that you chose this life. You chose us." His hand found hers in the darkness of the car, fingers intertwining with desperate intensity. "Because after tomorrow, there's no going back, Elena. You'll be as deep in this world as I am." She thought about the woman who'd crashed into his car 3 weeks ago. Elena Harper, physical therapy student, living paycheck to paycheck and dreaming of a quiet, normal life. That woman felt like a stranger now. Someone she'd once known but could barely remember. "I'm already there," she said quietly. "The moment I chose to fight beside you instead of hiding behind you, I crossed that line. Tomorrow night isn't about becoming something new. It's about finishing what we started." Dante brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. What we started, he repeated. I like the sound of that. Even though it means I'll know all your secrets, every detail of how the Moretti family operates. Especially because of that. Dante's smile held warmth and possessiveness in equal measure. A queen needs to understand the kingdom she's going to rule. The word hung between them like a promise and a question.
Queen.
Not just a protected asset or a cherished lover, but an equal partner in everything Dante had built and everything they would build together. Is that what I am? She asked. You're queen. You're whatever you want to be, Dante replied. But if you're asking what I want you to be, he paused, searching for words. I want you to be the person who stands beside me when the world tries to tear us apart. I want you to be the voice that reminds me there's more to power than fear. I want you to be the reason I build something worth protecting instead of just something worth fighting for. She stared at him in the dim light, this dangerous man who'd somehow become the center of her world. 3 weeks ago, the idea of ruling a criminal empire would have horrified her. Now, the possibility felt like destiny finally revealing itself. Ask me again after tomorrow night, she said finally. When we've eliminated Clav and secured our future. Ask me then if I want to be your queen. Dante's laugh was soft and full of dark promise. Oh, I will. And when I do, I already know what your answer will be. As they drove back toward the mansion through the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn, Elena realized he was right. The woman who'd fled from Derek Morrison's abuse had evolved into someone who would walk willingly into Victor Clav's trap. The frightened crash victim had become a predator capable of using her own brother as bait. Tomorrow night would test everything they'd built together. Their trust, their strategy, their love. And their willingness to do whatever it took to protect what mattered most. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Fear was for people who had something to lose. Elena Harper had lost everything the night she crashed into Dante Moretti's SUV. What emerged from that wreckage was someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to building an empire worth ruling alongside the man who'd shown her what it meant to choose power over safety. Tomorrow, Victor Clav would learn the difference between a victim and a queen. By the time he understood his mistake, it would be far too late to correct it. The Brooklyn warehouse felt like a cathedral of shadows when Elena walked through its rusted doors, her footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Victor Clav sat at a metal table in the center of the space, flanked by 6 armed men whose faces belonged on wanted posters. Even seated, he radiated the kind of casual menace that came from decades of getting his way through violence. But it was the man standing behind him that made her breath catch in her throat. James Harper looked exactly like their father. The same auburn hair, the same sharp jawline, the same green eyes she saw in her own mirror each morning. 5 years had hardened him, adding muscle to his frame and lines to his face. But he was unmistakably her brother. The brother she'd mourned, whose funeral she'd attended, whose grave she'd visited every year on the anniversary of his supposed death. "Hello, sister," James said, his voice carrying an accent she didn't recognize, Russian, maybe, or something Eastern European. "You look well, considering the circumstances." Victor Clav leaned back in his chair, studying her with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 45, with silver hair slicked back and hands that looked soft until one noticed the scars across his knuckles. "Miss Elena Harper," he said, pronouncing each syllable with careful precision. "The woman who has caused me so much trouble." "I didn't cause you anything," she replied, letting fear creep into her voice while the hidden recording equipment captured every word. "I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Were you?" Clav gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him, positioned perfectly to catch every angle from the cameras she knew Dante had placed throughout the warehouse. "Or were you exactly where Dante Moretti wanted you to be?" She sat down carefully, letting her hands shake as she placed them on the metal table. "I don't know what you mean." "Your brother has told me fascinating things about your childhood, Elena, about how you always were too curious for your own good, always inserting yourself into situations that didn't concern you." Clav's smile held no warmth. "It seems some things never change." James moved to stand beside Clav's chair, and Elena could see the expensive watch on his wrist, the tailored suit that spoke of money and influence. Her dead brother had done very well for himself in the criminal underworld. "Tell me about your relationship with Dante Moretti," Claude continued conversationally. "He's protecting me," she said, which was true enough. "After Derek died, Mr. Moretti said I wasn't safe because of what I'd overheard." "And what did you overhear?" She recounted the conversation about weapons, shipments, and warehouse locations, information that Marco had confirmed was already known to Claude's organization. As she spoke, she could see one of Claude's men taking notes, probably cross-referencing her story against intelligence they'd already gathered. "Interesting," Claude said when she finished. "And during your time at the Moretti estate, what did you observe?" This was the crucial moment. She began describing the mansion's layout, security protocols, and personnel details. All carefully selected information that would appear valuable while actually being useless. The real security measures were different from what she described. The personnel assignments had been changed, and the defensive positions she detailed were decoys Dante had established specifically for this meeting. "You pay very close attention to details," James observed. "Almost like you were trained to gather intelligence." "I was trained as a physical therapist," she shot back, letting irritation override fear for a moment. "We're taught to observe and document everything. It's part of the job." "Yes," Claude said thoughtfully. "Your medical training. That's actually why you're here, Elena." He stood up, walking around the table with predatory grace. "You see, I've been looking for someone with your specific skills. Someone who understands human anatomy, pain management, recovery techniques, someone who could be very useful in my operations." "I help people heal," she said, genuine revulsion creeping into her voice. "I don't hurt them." "Oh, but healing and hurting are just different applications of the same knowledge," Claude replied, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder with deceptive gentleness. "And I think you'd be surprised what you're capable of when properly motivated." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in hellish red shadows. But by then, Dante's assault team was already moving. Elena dove under the metal table as gunfire erupted from multiple directions, the warehouse becoming an echo chamber of violence and shouting. Claude's men were professionals, but they'd been expecting a negotiation, not a coordinated military strike. Dante's forces moved with surgical precision, each team hitting predetermined targets, while communication equipment jammed Claude's ability to call for reinforcements. Through the chaos, Elena saw James diving for cover behind a shipping container, his hand reaching for a weapon that had been hidden beneath his jacket. The brother she'd mourned was reaching for a gun, preparing to kill the people trying to save her. "Elena, move." Dante's voice cut through the gunfire as he appeared at the warehouse entrance, leading his second wave of attackers. She scrambled from under the table, staying low as bullets whizzed overhead. James had found his weapon and was returning fire, his aim disturbingly accurate as he forced Dante's men to take cover. "Behind you!" she screamed as one of Claude's men flanked Dante's position. Dante spun and fired in the same motion, dropping the attacker before turning his attention back to the main battle. She couldn't let him escape. Too much depended on ending this tonight. Without conscious thought, she ran toward the back of the warehouse, ducking between shipping containers and following the sound of Claude's retreating footsteps. The man who'd planned to torture information out of her, who'd killed Derek and God knew how many others, was 20 feet away from freedom. "Victor," she called out, letting desperation color her voice. "Don't leave me here." He turned, pale eyes reflecting the emergency lighting like a predator caught in headlights. "Elena, what are you doing?" "They'll kill me if they find me here," she said, walking closer with trembling steps. "Please, I can be useful to you. I can tell you things about Moretti's organization that your other sources don't know." Claude hesitated, greed warring with suspicion in his expression. That moment of indecision cost him everything. The knife she'd taken from James's jacket, lifted during their brief reunion embrace, slid between his ribs with the precision her medical training had taught her. She found the gap between the third and fourth ribs, angled upward toward his heart, and pushed until the blade found vital organs. "This is for Derek," she whispered as Clove's eyes widened with shock and understanding. "And for trying to use me as your personal torture expert." Viktor Clove, head of the Russian organization that had terrorized half the East Coast, died with her name on his lips and surprise in his eyes. The man who'd built an empire on fear and violence was killed by a 23-year-old physical therapy student who'd learned anatomy to heal
People.
The irony would have been funny if there had been time to appreciate it.
Elena.
James's voice came from behind her, filled with disbelief. "What have you done?" She turned to face her brother, the knife still in her hand, Clove's blood staining her clothes. "I chose a side," she said simply. "He was going to make us both rich," James said, raising his weapon with shaking hands. "We could have ruled this city together." "No," she replied, stepping over Clove's body. "You chose to rule through fear and violence. I chose to build something worth protecting." The gunshot echoed through the warehouse. But it wasn't James who fired. Dante appeared from behind a shipping container, his weapon still smoking, her brother crumpling to the ground with a bullet through his heart. "He was going to kill you," Dante said simply, holstering his gun and crossing to where she stood over Clove's corpse. She looked down at her brother's body, feeling nothing but a strange kind of relief. The James Harper who taught her to ride a bike had died 5 years ago in that car accident. The man lying on the warehouse floor was just someone wearing his face. "It's over," she said, dropping the bloodstained knife and walking into Dante's arms. "Yes," he agreed, holding her against his chest while sirens wailed in the distance. "It's over." Around them, the warehouse had fallen silent, except for the crackling of flames where a stray bullet had ignited some old paperwork. Clove's organization would crumble without its leader, his lieutenants turning on each other in the power vacuum his death would create. The war was over, and Elena Harper, the woman who'd crashed into Dante Moretti's car and accidentally started this whole chain of events, had ended it with a precisely placed blade between the ribs of New York's most dangerous criminal. She wasn't the same person who'd fled from Derek Morrison's abuse. She was someone harder, more decisive, and capable of killing when necessary to protect what mattered most. She was exactly who she needed to be to stand beside Dante Moretti as his equal partner in everything that came next. 8 months after Viktor Clove's death, Elena stood on the balcony of their penthouse overlooking Central Park, watching the morning sun paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and amber. Her hand rested protectively over the gentle curve of her belly, where their twins were growing strong and healthy, due to arrive in the spring.
Elena Moretti.
The name still felt new on her tongue, like expensive wine that takes time to fully appreciate. But everything about her life felt new now. The way she moved through the world, the respect in people's eyes when they recognized her, the absolute certainty that she belonged exactly where she was. "The board meeting is in an hour," Dante said from the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that still made her pulse quicken. Even in his business suit, preparing for a day of managing legitimate enterprises, he radiated the dangerous magnetism that had first captured her attention in that rain-soaked intersection. "Which board?" she asked, accepting the cup he offered. "We have so many now." "The medical foundation you'd established using Clove's seized assets. The construction company that provided jobs for former soldiers transitioning to civilian life. The import-export business that had become surprisingly profitable once we'd eliminated its criminal components. The hospital expansion project. Your project." Dante settled beside her at the railing, his free hand coming to rest over hers on her stomach. "Dr. Elena Moretti, founding director of the Moretti Medical Center. It has a nice ring to it." The medical center had been her idea, born from the realization that her skills could heal more than just gunshot wounds and broken bones. They were building a state-of-the-art facility in Queens, designed to serve the communities that traditional healthcare often overlooked. It would be staffed by medical professionals who understood discretion, funded by profits from their legitimate businesses, and managed by someone who'd learned that sometimes healing required more than just clinical expertise. "Any word from the federal task force?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the contentment in Dante's expression. Agent Morrison signed off on the final reports yesterday. The FBI is officially satisfied that the CLOV organization has been completely dismantled, with no remaining threats to public safety. Dante's smile held satisfaction and something that might have been pride. They're particularly impressed with the intelligence you provided about the medical supply theft rings. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same federal agents who'd spent years trying to infiltrate Dante's organization had ended up working with them to eliminate a genuine threat to public safety. Her detailed knowledge of CLOV's operations, combined with Dante's strategic expertise, had led to the arrest of over 40 criminals involved in everything from human trafficking to pharmaceutical theft. And the construction permits for the Brooklyn project, approved yesterday, will break ground next month on the first of 12 affordable housing complexes. Dante's thumb traced gentle circles on her hand. By the time her children are old enough to understand, the Moretti name will be associated with hospitals, schools, and homes. Not just the old business. The old business. They still called it that. Though most of the Moretti family's traditional activities had been either legitimized or eliminated over the past 8 months, the protection services had become a licensed security company. The import operations had gone completely legal. Even the loan services now operated under federal banking regulations. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, a question that had become ritual between them. "You're giving up an empire your grandfather built." "I'm transforming it into something better," Dante corrected, the same answer he'd given every time. "Something our children can be proud to inherit." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, she could see the remnants of their old world scattered across the city. The warehouse in Brooklyn, where CLOV had died, was now a community center. The mansion in Long Island had been sold to a tech entrepreneur who turned it into a conference center. Even the Riverside Rehabilitation Center, where she'd once worked part-time, was now under Moretti Medical's umbrella. Its services expanded, and its mission elevated. "Mrs. Moretti." The voice belonged to Sarah, their housekeeper and former member of Dante's security team. Her transition from bodyguard to domestic staff had been smoother than anyone expected, though Elena suspected she still carried at least 2 weapons under her perfectly pressed uniform. "The car is ready for your appointment with Dr.
Chun.
And Mr. Ricci has arrived for his meeting with Mr. Moretti." Dr. I. Chun was her obstetrician, a brilliant woman who'd been treating high-risk pregnancies for 20 years and understood the unique challenges of expecting twins. Mr. Ricci was the former head of CLOV's financial operations, who decided that cooperating with federal authorities was preferable to spending the rest of his life in prison. "I should go," she said, finishing her coffee. "The twins have been active all morning, and Dr. Chin wants to monitor their positioning." Dante walked her to the elevator, his hand never leaving the small of her back. Even now, 8 months after the last shots were fired, he remained protective in ways that should have felt suffocating, but instead felt like love made manifest. "Elena," he said as the elevator doors began to close. "Tonight, after all the meetings and appointments, I want to show you something."
What kind of something?
"The kind that requires champagne and candlelight and a question I should have asked months ago." The elevator doors closed on his enigmatic smile, leaving her with butterflies in her stomach that had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones and everything to do with the possibility that Dante Moretti still had surprises up his expertly tailored sleeves. Dr. Chen's appointment confirmed what they'd suspected. The twins were healthy, growing perfectly, and positioned for a relatively uncomplicated delivery in 12 weeks. Baby A was slightly larger, probably going to be our little overachiever. Baby B was perfectly positioned, but seemed content to let their sibling take the lead, just like their parents, Elena murmured, studying the ultrasound images that showed 2 perfect profiles in black and white. By the time she returned to the penthouse, Manhattan was transitioning from afternoon to evening. The sky painted in shades of orange and pink that made their windows look like stained glass. Dante was waiting in their living room, but he'd changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a white shirt that made his brown eyes look almost black. "Close your eyes," he said, taking her hands with the same gentle reverence he'd shown from their first day together. Dante, she began, but his soft command stopped her. Trust me. She closed her eyes, letting him guide her through their home toward what she assumed was the balcony. But instead of outside air, she felt the warmth of candles and smelled roses, dozens of them, if the fragrance was any indication. Open, Dante said softly. Their dining room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Hundreds of white candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, while red roses covered every surface in cascades of silk and velvet. A small table was set for two in the center of it all, with champagne chilling beside sparkling cider for the pregnant woman who couldn't drink alcohol but still deserved celebration. Dante, this is. 8 months ago, you crashed into my life and changed everything, he said, pulling out her chair with old-world gallantry. You took a spoiled crime prince and turned him into a man worthy of building something beautiful. She sat down, overwhelmed by the romance of the gesture and the love shining in his eyes. You did that yourself. I just gave you a reason. No, Dante said, moving to stand beside her chair. You gave me everything. That's when he dropped to one knee, producing a ring box from his pocket with the flourish of a magician performing his greatest trick. The diamond inside caught the candlelight and threw it back in rainbow fragments. But it was the expression on Dante's face that took her breath away. Elena Harper Moretti, mother of my children, partner in all things, queen of everything we've built together, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Will you marry me? She stared at him through tears of joy and love and overwhelming gratitude for this strange chain of events that had brought them to this moment. We're already married, she pointed out, laughing through her tears. We had the ceremony 6 months ago. We had a business arrangement, Dante corrected, sliding the ring onto her finger above her wedding band. 2 people making strategic decisions about their future. This time I'm asking Elena Moretti, the woman who chose to stay, who chose to fight, who chose to build something beautiful from the wreckage of everything we used to be. Yes, she said, pulling him up for a kiss that tasted like champagne and promises and the absolute certainty that they had built something worth protecting. Yes to all of it. As Dante spun her around their candlelit dining room, she caught her reflection in the windows that overlooked their city. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the frightened physical therapy student who'd crashed her Honda Civic into a stranger's SUV. On a rainy night in Manhattan, Elena Moretti was someone stronger, more dangerous, and absolutely committed to the empire she'd helped transform from criminal enterprise into legitimate dynasty. She was someone who could kill when necessary to protect her family, who could heal when mercy was the better choice, and who ruled beside Dante Moretti as his equal in every way that mattered. Their children would inherit hospitals and schools instead of territories and tribute. They would grow up knowing that their parents had chosen love over fear, construction over destruction, and each other over everything else the world had offered. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and absolutely perfect. And it had all started with a car accident on a rainy night when a woman fleeing her past collided with a man who would become her future.